All right.
Hey team, welcome back to another incredible episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and today I'm on with my new friend, Steven Harrelson. He's the COO at Growers. So we're going ag tech for you guys today. And welcome to the show, man. Glad to have you here.
Excellent. Yeah. I appreciate you guys having me. I'm excited about being here.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Steven, let's kick it off. What does it mean for you to be intentional?
Yeah, Mark. I mean, it's interesting to think about, right? Because there's a lot of different definitions about what intentional could mean. And as I thought back, kind of on my leadership experience, I really started thinking about, it's to me, it's really about being deliberate about our choices, right? And having kind of a vision for outcomes that we would expect. And there's so many people in my experience that have a vision, for an outcome, but they don't really have a path to get there. Right. When I think about, society the way it is today, we're full of distractions, and it's easy to get distracted. In particular, it's more challenging even when I think about the ag industry because it's so seasonal, it's so cyclical. And so, you know, when it's springtime, for instance, it's kind of all hands on deck. Everybody's just trying to not drown and keep from being overwhelmed in their day-to-day duties, and they're constantly putting out fires, and it makes it really challenging to be very deliberate about the choices that you make because it's rapid fire, one to the next to the next. And I think what you're doing here on the podcast, I think is really, really good for the industry because I think it really brings this sense of we've got to be intentional. This industry is hard enough. The ag cycles and seasons that we experience are hard enough. And you see the evolution of the industry and the way people expect things to be. Intentionality is going to be one of the things that we have to focus on as an industry. So thank you for doing this podcast and bringing that general awareness to it because it's going to be huge if it hasn't already for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you saying so, and thank you for that. Thank you for the compliment. That's I say this a lot on the show, but not everybody listens to every episode, so I say it again. It's one of the big reasons that we have created this is that so many people, in whether it's in leadership roles or just working in the industry or going through life, man, like we find ourselves often experiencing resentment, right? And resentment is a result of regret that has stacked up over time. Okay. And so when we don't get to take advantage of opportunities, when we don't, get, find ourselves maybe sometimes waiting or sometimes, doing that thing that we thought we should have, or that we know we should have, right? And then we get those little regrets, and those regrets, they stack. And eventually they will turn into resentment, and resentment is very hard to root out. So what I discovered in this work around just the word intention and then diving into intentional leadership is that all the times in life I've become the most resentful is always because of the times in life I have been the least intentional.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, particularly when you think about, you can think about being intentional about your own goals and things you want to accomplish, in your life, but it's different when you think about it from a people standpoint. And leaders usually have some influence, some level of influence over people. And again, if you're not intentional as a leader, to your point, Mark, it builds up resentment with people because the thing about it is we're in a society today where instant gratification is kind of key to drive, for people, and it's really easy for them to get distracted. It's really easy for them to kind of dive into, especially in the social media atmosphere where everything they see is about all the positives in everyone else's life. And you think about it, if you can't take a step back as a person and think about what good you have in your life and the blessings that you have, it makes it really difficult to be intentional. And so, I think from an organizational perspective, um, we would all do ourselves a lot of justice and a lot of good by thinking intentionally so that we don't create that resentment that people harbor. And when you think about the changes that come in the agriculture industry with people's demands, Mark, are much different today than they have been in the past, right? When I came into the industry, 16, 17 years ago, the culture just in the industry was about when the ox is in the ditch, you got to get it out at all costs, right? Whether that meant working on a Saturday, a Sunday, till 2 o'clock in the morning, literally it didn't matter, right? Because it was all a focus on delivering results from a service perspective. And today, people's expectations are we need a good work-life balance, right?
Yeah.
And the expectation for people coming into the industry isn't that they're going to work every Saturday or they're going to work every Sunday or they're going to work till 2 a.m. in the morning because they have other priorities. And so as leaders, how do we constantly think about building the culture where we can accept that, and we can be very intentional about meeting people's needs kind of where they are, because this I don't want to call it a problem, but this expectation is going to continue kind of down that path where everyone's going to be considered an individual and they're going to be expected for their manager or their leader to kind of treat them that way and think about their needs or their wants or their priorities, not just in a work setting or a professional setting, but in their entire life. And I think being intentional about your leadership style can help you do that.
Absolutely, man. And it's so what you just framed up right there, Stephen, is like, I mean, that is the challenge, right? I mean, that is how do we solve all the problems and get people home on time, right? So
Yep.
that they can be there for for dinner with their kids or get to the games or be involved. I think that's the image that people have when they think work life balance. One of the things that I would position around this for those intentional leaders or people wanting to be more intentional is that effectively, I think we've just been called to raise our standards for how we experience life. So one of the top three things that people come to our Thriving Leader program for is that they ask for when they get there is time management. And then that's number two. And three is work-life balance. And sometimes they interchange. Those are one of the top two or three things. So we've been helping people solve for that for a long time. And there's two words that come up. I'm going to teach here for a second if I can. I know
Absolutely.
the interview is for you and we want to learn more about Steven Harrelson, but you brought it up. So now I got to teach. So it comes to, it comes down to two words. Okay. Standards and stewardship. Okay. So standards, right? That's the level, like it's got to be this or something better. Right. And stewardship means it's something that you're responsible for, something you're in charge of. But if you want to get into the Bible a little bit, what stewardship really means is that you are to multiply what you've been given. Okay, so I think about the story um, of the talents in the Bible, the parable of the talents, where the servants were given a certain number of talents according or a certain amount of money according to their ability, and the ones who got the most praise at the end of the day were the ones who took what they had been given and multiplied it. Right. So as stewards, as leaders, as intentional leaders, we're called to take the people that we are charged with caring for and multiply them. Okay. How do we do that? We have to raise the standards. Right. And for a long time, this is what I believe. People don't have to agree with me. We weren't as intentional as leaders as we could be about multiplying those people. We just said grind harder, put in more time, get more done, work more hours, because that's what our dads did and that's what our grandpas did. And now we live in a world where all those things, the cumulative compound effect of all the baseball games and the family trips and the family moments that got missed, those regrets I talked about early on, have stacked to the point where as a society, we just won't take it anymore. And that's
Yeah,
what happened.
you're
That's
spot on.
exactly what has happened. And so as intentional leaders, we're called to be better stewards. And that means that we have to raise the standards. Our standards have been challenged. And that's one of the I think what will be one of the hallmarks of our generation of leaders. Will be judged based on how well we did with that. How well did we solve for that? And by the way, there's no clean answer to any of this. But that's what we're after.
No, I would argue, because I agree 100%. I would argue that I'm not sure that process getting any easier for leaders, right? Because when you think about what are leaders being scorecarded on, right? Like what are they being graded on? And it's execution of results, execution of profits, delivering higher profits, and it's a very much so a numbers driven game. And what's happening is you're having less people come into the industry, and so what's actually happening is you're putting more on less people to deliver those, same results or better from year in, year out. And so, everyone's being challenged in this, you mentioned it, right? Like, time management. How do I do that better when I've got more work today than I had yesterday? And I wasn't very good at time management yesterday either, and so it's just this kind of compounding effect where at some point, right, your point about being good stewards, the people that you have and multiplying their efforts and what you've been given, that process is going to get more and more difficult as time goes by.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a huge challenge. And here's not, by the way, this is not an easy thing to go and answer for. That's part of our job as leaders is you're a problem solver. So we have to go and solve for problems. There's two ways to look at how we plan our day. We either plan it reactively or we plan it proactively.
Right? Sure. Yep.
And so what most people are doing is planning reactively based on what has already happened. Okay. So we can measure, there's two measurements, right? There's lagging indicators, which is, did we get the sales? Did we get the profit? Did we get those hard things that we can measure or not? That's a yes, no.
Sure.
But we can only measure that after the fact.
Right.
Almost nobody pays attention to are the leading indicators that get us the lagging success. So where's the measurement around those things? Right? We don't have hard metrics inside the business space in most organizations that are measuring the importance of the leading indicators. I'll give you a quick example. This is one for me. And this is and often, by the way, sometimes the leading indicators don't make sense. So when I'm in the habit of texting 5 people a day, just adding value, just saying, hey, how you doing? How you been? Long time. Let's catch up. Nothing like, I'm not asking for an appointment. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for business. It's not about that. I'm just saying, hey, here's a funny meme that I saw on Instagram. I think you should take a look at it. Here's a quote, right, that I saw. Or, hey, I just, you know what, Steven, been a long time. I'm just thinking about you. Hope you're doing well. That's it, right? It's literally like, so I do 5 of those. It takes like a minute, to pop those out. Just, and I'll literally just pick random people out of my list. They may not even be prospects. They're just people.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. When I do that, here's what the interesting correlation is. When I'm in a good habit of doing that consistently, at least 5 days a week, my pipeline in my business stays full.
Exactly right.
I've found the correlation between that behavior and my pipeline staying full. It's just being, I call it the energy of sales behavior. I'm just being in the energy of what? Being of value. So what another good measurement is just like, what are you doing to just be of value to the industry rather than asking for something from it?
Sure.
Right. If I can be of more value than I ask from it, then I should never go hungry.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like I just put more in than I take out. It's like a bank account, right? It's that emotional bank. I'm the only one that knows about it, but for me, that's a leading indicator of lagging success. And so we need to start to look at the way we manage things a little bit differently, because these challenges that you and I are talking about right now, they don't go away. I've been doing this for 11 years since we started this company. We're solving a lot of the same challenges. Yet we have bright spots, individuals that we've worked with that are living their lives infinitely better, happier, more fulfilled, because for the one simple shift of they're focusing on a leading indicator. And here would be an example, a simple gratitude journal. Instead of reflecting at the end of the day on everything that sucked, how about we just take 2 minutes, open an iNote on your phone, right? And write down 3 things that you can appreciate that did go well today.
I love it.
Right?
I love it. Yep.
I mean, that thing right there, it has you do that every day. There's a compound effect of that kind of stuff. And by the way, that's not even being intentional for someone else. It's just being intentional for you.
Absolutely. Well, when you think about it, I mean, it's very difficult to be intentional with others if you're not intentional with yourself,
Yeah.
right? And so when I think about, I get up every morning at 4 o'clock. I'm at the gym by 5, pretty much 7 days a week.
Nice.
And people always ask, well, man, how do you make those sacrifices, or how do you have that kind of discipline to go to the gym every day, right? Particularly when it's that early, and it's like I can't do my job effectively if I don't take care of myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when you to your point, right, it's you got to be intentional with yourself. You got to create a strong foundation so that you can multiply your what you've been given to others, right? And I think that's really important that we take for granted a lot. Because I'll never forget, one of the first times I came into, my first organization here in the industry. We went to this, big conference where everyone in the organization was there, and of course I was still a young guy at that time, and I kind of looked around and I thought, there's a lot of people here that don't take care of themselves, and really that gave me a view of the organization that probably wasn't the best in the world, and while it was a little bit misleading because people tend to take care of themselves in different ways, right? And some of us mental, some of us physical, and things like that, but still, the bottom line is you got to be able to take care of yourself. And when I think about how do I keep my energy up, how do I keep myself motivated, it's those simple things that keeps me creating that standard, you know. And I think it's important that we all, kind of do the same thing when it comes to taking care of yourself.
Such a good point, man. Such a good point. Very intentional. Glad to hear you getting to the gym, and you're grinding. You're getting it early.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just a part of life, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy to start with, but you create that discipline, and I tell people all the time, it's like now if I don't make it to the gym, it messes up my entire day, right? Like I can't be my best self for others around me unless I do that, right?
Was there ever a time when you weren't disciplined with that behavior?
Oh, so I started this. So I've worked out just about my entire life, kind of on and off. And for after I had my first child, I really got out of the habit of working out because really my priority focus shifted to take care of kids and things like that. And that was I didn't have a lot of experience having kids, young kids when I was younger, and so when I had my first child, I really prioritized that, and so I really got out of the habit of working out. And when you get out of the habit of working out, you don't eat as well, and so really I went through a period of time where I got in pretty bad shape. And really, I was, I didn't like the way my clothes fit. I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't like the way I felt on a daily basis. I'd be tired for no reason, right? It didn't matter whether I got 8 hours of sleep or 12 hours of sleep. I felt the same, and I just, at some point, I really just got up. Well, really, it was about 4 years ago. I said, you know what? I've got to get back to being disciplined, both with working out and my diet. And so I just had enough, and ended up kind of sticking with it, for the last 4 years.
Yeah. Awesome. Good for you. Good for you. And yeah, one of the reasons I asked that question intentionally was so that people understand, like, hey, guys like us that are make it a habit of working out. This isn't like not like this was a forever thing. Not like we've just never not done this. I mean, this was a choice at some point to live a healthy lifestyle. I've never met a man with my last name older than the age of 75. Okay.
Wow.
That's one
Yeah,
of my motives. I would really like to be the first one.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
God may have other plans, but I have got, like, I'm giving it the best chance I can, controlling what I can control and keeping this thing tuned up. And one of the things you brought up, which is, and I wrote down a note, standard of feeling better, right? To go back to our earlier point, or my earlier point about standards, and, being a steward, right? You're a steward of your body, right? So your job is to multiply your body, to make it a machine, to make it better, right? God only gave you one, so you might as well take care of it. Why do you let it survive when it could thrive, right? Why do you let it survive any longer than it has to? So that's the first point. The second point, though, is like, you can actually challenge the standard for how you feel, right? Most people are going through the day thinking that being tired and sluggish is the norm. They think that's just how it is, and they haven't stopped to consider that doesn't have to be how it is,
That's
right?
exactly.
You can
Yep.
actually
Hey, I
feel
was
good
there.
in your body all day long if you give it the things and do the things to it that are required. But that requires you to do one really important thing, and I think you'll agree with me on this: is you can't let it win,
Exactly right.
right? Because the body lies to you.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's so many days, right? Like I'm, we're human, right? And there's so many days where I may not really feel like, or I'm not super motivated to go to the gym, or I'm not really motivated, not to eat, some chocolate cake or some dessert out there, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
that I know is not healthy for me. But at some point you have to stop and say, hey, is this better for your body, right? Will you be a better version of yourself if you push yourself to go take care of yourself and get past the kind of the extrinsic motivation, because at some point discipline kicks in and you better yourself. At least that's been my experience.
Yep. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Good stuff. Well, we have we kicked off with one question, Steven, and we've gone like 23 minutes on that one question, which which is fantastic. So we're definitely going to do this again. We're not done yet, but we're going to do it again so that we have more time to dive into some other things. But just give us a little bit of, if you would, let's tell us a little bit more about your background, and tell us about Growers so that we can be familiar with you and the company.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I transitioned over to Growers back in the tail end of December of 2023 here. So I'm relatively new to the organization. Prior to that, I spent the last 16 years and virtually my entire professional career at Southern States on the East Coast, Mid Atlantic area, where it's a cooperative ag retail system. Um, and prior to that, I grew up in Georgia, and I was telling Mark earlier, I actually didn't have much of an appreciation for agriculture prior to my time at the University of Georgia. And I was fortunate enough to land in Alpha Gamma Rho, where they kind of showed me a deep appreciation for agriculture. And thank God they did, right? Because my experience here in the ag industry has been really humbling and really just a great experience. Not just from aspects of working with farmers and things like that, but the people in general have just been excellent. And I've shared that agriculture is just kind of a small world where most people know most people, and I think that really gives a lot of credence to the industry that you can lean on one another. You can create deep relationships with people rather than just transactional, in nature. And I think that's why I'm so proud of the podcast that you're doing, Mark, is just because I think the concept of rising tide lifts all ships really has a big play for the industry. And because at the end of the day, Mark, I think the industry is evolving, and I think that's a good thing, right? I think there's a lot of opportunities for the industry to get much more efficient, and I'm excited to see how the industry kind of tackles the challenges. You and I were just talking about, right? Like you mentioned the touch points where you're sending out 5 texts a day and being intentional about just reaching out to people and asking them how they're doing, right, and just creating more value to people. And I preach this idea of touch points all the time, right, because when you think about the challenges the industry faces, particularly with people and the work-life balance challenges and people feeling like they're not heard or they're not being seen as individuals, they're just seen as a cog in the bigger wheel, right? These touch points create a lot of value for people, and you may not even recognize it as a leader because maybe you don't get a response, right? I would imagine, Mark, half the text you send out, maybe you get a response, maybe you don't.
Way
Uh,
less than half.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But the idea is you're reaching out and touching people in a way that maybe others haven't, right? And I think that's really important. And so, again, going kind of tying this back into what Growers is doing, because honestly, people have asked me, Mark, you spent 16 years at Southern States Cooperative. You had this, a lot of equity built, personal equity kind of built in the company. Why would you ever think about leaving? And my first response, just really not even thinking about it, is the struggles that particularly ag retail faces when it comes to people and expectations, and holding people accountable to those standard expectations is only becoming more and more of a challenge. And while I think ag retail has a lot of tools in their toolbox to help solve some of these problems, this idea of creating enough sustainable touch points and meeting demands of farmers that again are only going up, is becoming more and more difficult with the toolboxes that exist, right? And so, when I started getting involved or understanding what Growers was doing from a software platform standpoint, some of the technology that they're building is just, I think, evolutionary to the industry that can really make some of these challenges kind of dissipate. And it was intriguing enough to kind of see the potential for what Growers is building with their software, to say, you know what, this is sort of a leap of faith, but I'm gonna trust God has the right plan here, and know that what the potential that this thing could help solve, could make the entire industry much better over time. And so, you from a tactical standpoint, really Growers is designing software that puts manufacturers, ag retailers, and farmers kind of all in the same platform. And the kind of the feather in the hat, that brings just a ton of value there is, I think it's the first software platform in the industry that doesn't create any friction for any of them, right? Like it's a way to enhance all three relationships kind of simultaneously without creating any friction for any of the three. And so again, solves a ton of problems while creating this unique aspect of putting all three players in the same platform.
Well, I mean, the idea, of software, right, is that it's supposed to make our life easier. It's supposed to help remove that friction. And I think when I'm placing bets these days, if you go back and look over the last 25 years or so, and you were looking at stocks to pick, right? Well, I'm definitely picking the stocks that, if I could go back historically, that removed the most friction. Right? Amazon removed a lot of friction from our life. Walmart, originally removed a lot of friction from our life because it was easy access and cheap access to a lot of stuff in one place. And then you get Amazon that comes along and, can compete with that and kick their butts because they created a much more efficient system. Now, those are just, examples of of people who revolutionized the industry, but that's what it takes. It's the mindset around anybody who is removing friction. It's like when we do our training and coaching programs, like we know that employers want to coach their people, but they don't have a lot of time.
Right.
So we say, okay, how about we'll coach for you, and we'll handle a lot of that, right? To an extent, in as much as we can as a third party, but we do a lot of the coaching, and that helps. And it helps that employee feel heard and feel more engaged with the process. And that alone, let alone what they learn in the training, is worth it, is worth the investment of what it costs to have someone in, because now you actually have somebody coaching that person, encouraging that person, helping them set goals, work towards goals, etc. And that gives the manager more time to actually just frees up their time to focus on some of that, the coaching that only they can do internally instead of all the other stuff all the time.
Absolutely. And I love the aspect of coaching, right? And I think that's something that the industry is just underdeveloped or underinvested in for a long time, right? Because the industry is, and I hesitate to say it, but I think, at least from my experience, particularly in sales, has been this idea of, we're going to get enough talent, and we're going to call them salespeople. We're going to create enough positions to where we're going to leverage every personal relationship each seller has with a farmer out there, and we're going to leverage that relationship to create more sales opportunities, right? And if we acquire enough salespeople in a general geography that has these relationships with farmers, we're going to have enough leverage to keep kind of the sales pipeline full, right? And so that we haven't invested in a lot of coaches, sales coaches out there. And honestly, Mark, is probably one of the best jobs I've ever had. So Southern States has always had this structure of where they would have district managers or regional managers that were more operationally driven individuals, and they were really, really good at operations. They understood, supply chain, logistics, pricing. They understood that as well as anybody I've ever been around. But when it came to being a coach, we were very, very underinvested from that standpoint. And it took having a kind of a third party organization come in and decipher like what needs Southern States needed to invest in. And one of the paramount items there was you need some sales coaches. You need sales leadership that is devoted 100% towards salespeople. And so Southern States actually restructured and brought in what they called area sales leader. And so I was kind of the first one to take on that role within the organization. And it's probably been the best job I've ever had because it was also probably the hardest job I ever had as well, because, I went from being an individual performer. And when I say individual performer, Mark, I mean that in every sense of the word.
Doing all the things, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I can't say that in the most positive light either, because, I was very self-driven. I was motivated to perform extremely well. Just again, me, myself, and I. And honestly, I feel like that created a lot of friction for a lot of different people, because I was young. And I thought I was a hot shot. I thought because my numbers were really good, I could do no wrong. Yep. And because I spent 10 years kind of being that same way, I developed some really bad habits. And it wasn't until I actually took that area sales leader position where I realized that one, I really had to be intentional about developing coaching and leadership skills because I didn't have them. I got promoted in that role because I was really good at sales, right? And there's a difference between being an individual performer and being an intentional leader and a coach. And so it actually, and then to kind of multiply that, it's like now you're going to be coaching and leading a group of your peers. And so you think about that kind of leap, that's probably the biggest hurdle I've probably faced in my leadership, is, like I said, a new role being structured in the organization, me being very much devoted to individual performance for 10 plus years, and leading a group of my peers. It was the hardest job and the most rewarding job I ever had. And what it really did was it made me start thinking about, I had some really good mentors in the early phases of my career, and I didn't recognize it. In fact, one of the folks that I admire the most is a guy named Bob Davis that retired from Southern States. And in fact, before he retired, he and I we weren't even on speaking terms, actually, because my ignorance to the way the world really worked really showed up, where we had a knockdown drag out, because he was trying to hold me accountable for things that I needed to be doing, but I didn't see it that way. Right. I was sort of blinded by, hey, numbers look really good. I feel like I'm doing the things I need to be prioritizing and those kind of things. And, he kind of held my feet to the fire, and I didn't like it. And so when I took on this area sales leader position and I started seeing some of the same habits that were created with some of the other salespeople, and I kept thinking about, as I developed my leadership, how do I hold these people accountable? How do I make sure that they're doing the things that I know they need to do to be successful long term rather than just transactional? And every time, just about every time, Mark, I had to look in the mirror and say, you know what? I've had this conversation before, except I was the guy being talked to instead of the one talking. And I used to think, my God, I really wish that I could go back in time and I could change so much about the way I behaved and my attitude and the way I just thought about things, or at least the way I saw the world. Because now I can understand how difficult Bob's job was in making sure that I was doing the things that he knew I needed to be doing to be successful. Because now I'm playing that role and I'm seeing the challenges and seeing the difficulties, and I'm thinking, man, if I could cut your head open and I could just dump information into it and make you understand and realize why this is important, it'd be really good for you, you know. So I've seen that, yeah, over my experience.
Wow. Well, man, I mean, that's we're closing with that story today because that's some of the best content we've had here in the last half hour since you and I have been on. I mean, it's, you could not have framed up better that experience that happens for leaders in the industry every single day. You have individual performers that are great at what they do, and you get somebody who maybe that person gets promoted, but they don't get promoted with the leadership skills that has to get developed now. Right.
Yep.
And that happens often. Sometimes we advise against doing that, but the reality is that's going to happen because we need experienced people to be able to move up that know what's got to happen. And now, but okay, this is where that concept of stewardship comes back in. So now you've been given a new job, and now your job. So you're great at multiplying yourself in the last job. Now you're in a new job where you got to multiply others. That's a new
Yep.
set of skills, buddy. Like that's it. So
Yeah,
we need to dive back into that more. We're out of time for today, though, man. Steven, fantastic interview, fantastic conversation today. We need to do it again. Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Mark. And again, thank you for what you're doing with the podcast for the industry, and certainly appreciate you having me on.
Likewise. Well, guys, go check out Growers. See if that makes sense for you, for your organization. They're doing some pretty cool things over there. All right. Thanks for being on, man.
Thanks, Mark.